Pod. Pod.
You know that my family's from Hull, right?
You mentioned that in your message, yeah. Something about a leisure centre or something.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Yeah, he's still, my uncle still works there, actually.
All right, so what's the story there then?
My mum's family are from there. We used to, we used to go up there loads when I was a kid.
Right.
Yeah, my uncle played for the Hull youth team.
No way. Did you ever go watch Hull play then?
Oh yeah, loads. Yeah, I mean, well, not loads. I went a few times, but usually to the away games. Actually, I'm trying to think if we ever, because back, I guess when I was a kid, they were Division 3, so it was easier to go. But
yeah, was this like early to mid 90s?
Yeah.
With the Tiger Stripe kit.
Yeah, I've got one somewhere.
No way.
I remember went to see them play Aston Villa in the League Cup. With I'm assuming you follow football, so this is all like
yeah, I follow Hull, so all this makes sense to me. Yeah, right. I think they called it the Thriller at the Villa.
Probably, yeah.
And Stan Collymore got a lot of stick that day. I remember. Yeah, yeah, those Tiger Stripe kits are worth a bit of money now. So
are they?
Yeah, like the real, especially when we first got to the Premier League, like it became a real collector's item, going for like hundreds of pounds.
Oh, weird. Yeah. Yeah, that was a good one.
But where did you grow up?
I mean, because my dad's a doctor, we sort of moved around quite a bit, but kind of just around different places in the Midlands. We lived on the border of Wales for a bit. I never really know what to say when people ask me what my hometown is.
So how come you ended up supporting Blackburn?
Well, because it was 1993. Or maybe it was 92, just before they won the Premier League, and they had all my favourite players, and everyone at school was either Man United or Liverpool, and I didn't want to support a team that everyone else supported, and then they had Tim Flowers, Colin Hendry. I mean, even Graham Lasso, he was one of my favourite players. Probably the only person in the world to have Graham Lasso as a favourite player.
Do you still have the fantasy league going?
Oh yeah. I always make a really bad start. I used to win every year, but now it's like there's thousands of people who do it. So I'm lucky if I get in the top 100. I'm doing okay this year. I think I'm about 300,000th in the world, which is not really not too bad.
Yeah, I think I'm well below that. I had a really bad start, and then this girl at work who was like dominating our work league. So I was asking her about it. She was like, I use FPL Scout all the time to tell me who to pick.
What?
So I've been having a look at that, and it is helpful, but I don't know if that's classed as cheating or what, really.
No, I don't. You know what though? Because I had a season where I was looking at it all the time, and I started doing really badly, and then the second I stopped looking and just started going back on, like, I think because I finished like 2000th once.
What in the world?
I mean, I don't know how, but it was the season that I paid the least attention to what anyone else was doing. So I'm trying to get back to that.
The same people always ended up being at the top, don't they? So there must be a certain skill to it.
Yeah, well, there's a guy, his name's Jay Edgersdorf or something. He's like, he always gets interviewed for these things because I think he's done it for like 10 or 15 years and he's never finished outside the top 10,000 or something crazy. Right. So if there's anyone who, but he's not even doing that well this year. I think he's like 150,000. But yeah, I always kind of look to see what he's doing.
Yeah, I'll have to join the Horrors one next season. I keep forgetting to do it.
Yeah, do it. It's fun. I mean, it's like I said, very competitive. So, serious business.
I was watching an interview with you on Soccer AM where you said the winner gets a lock of the Horrors' hair. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I got to take it without them knowing, though. That's part of the prize. that's really a prize for me, to be honest. But yeah, so I guess I win either way. I think that that Soccer AM thing was probably, without exaggeration, probably the the highlight of any achievement related to music.
You absolutely nailed the penalty kick.
I was so happy because you couldn't even hear it on the camera, but they didn't like me in the studio. I don't know. There was just a thing, like a weird vibe in there. And when the cameras were off, the presenters went really cold, like just weird. Like Neville Southall was great. He was like, you know, really cool guy. Like, I don't know, kind of like a granddad figure, you know. But the presenters were so fucking weird. The second the cameras went off, they were just like, I don't know, like it's like I'd done something to remember their family or something. It was but yeah, so people were actually like kind of booing before I went to take the penalty. That's why I went in.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, at risk of just turning it into a football podcast, but I saw you lost today. Like, what's current take on everything at Blackburn?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it's probably the most. It's the most fun to watch team we've had in quite a few years, I think. I mean, I don't think Adam Armstrong is going to be there next year, looks like, because, you know, whenever you score that many goals, you sort of get picked up. But, I mean, they're talking about selling him for £30 million. So, I mean, the amount due for the club is crazy. I can't believe they're still owned by Venky's. It's just... I was
just about to say that, yeah.
So weird.
I mean, talking about that on Soccer AM, and then I had a look today, and they were still there. I was like, blimey, I bet no one could have called that back in the day.
I know, you'd never have. I mean, yeah, I don't even know what their like their end game was. I don't know what their plan was. I mean, I guess to make money somehow, but I mean, yeah, weird.
I always thought when they sacked Allardyce?
Yeah,
when you were about mid-table or something.
That was just, it was mind-boggling.
Yeah, mental. All right, I guess better move on. Just gives an idea of how you first got involved in music and then how you went from that point to eventually getting a record deal.
Yeah, well, this is a very quick one to answer because it happened so quickly. There was so little time between starting a band and getting signed. I didn't even really have a chance to think what was happening. I mean, I think we had 2 rehearsals. We did a gig. The editor of Vice happened to be walking by, and a friend of his was going, and he said, you know, oh yeah, come see this band of my friends playing in whatever. So he was like, oh, I don't want to go see this fucking random band. I'm not going to go. He just stuck his head in, and then, you know, I think we were only playing like 15-minute sets at that point. I mean, it was our first gig, but we kind of did that for quite a while because we didn't have any more songs, and we played all the ones we did have like twice as fast as we planned to anyway. So the gigs always ended pretty quickly, and they were always quite aggressive. And I think probably I would say 10th gig, we had a guy from Polydor there. I mean, it was nuts.
Like going before that, then how did you meet everyone in the band? Did you kind of grow up together, or how did it work?
Well, I grew up with Tom, one of the guys, and I remember on the last, because you know, when I don't know if you ever found this, but when I was at school, all the people in bands were kind of they were always like technical musicians, you know. They were always like grade 8 guitar, or like, you know, or get in there, or you know, yeah. All the other kids at school and bands were you know, proper technical musicians. I thought that's what you had to do, and I remember last day of school, or last few weeks of school, I formed a band for a random gig we did, like a school gig, made up of a load of kids that were kicked out of their respective bands, and we did a load of like Who covers, the Kinks, stuff like that, quite kind of raw sounding. And I'd never sung before, and I just sort of did it. And I feel like a lot of the things that you end up loving, you sort of just fall into like that. You do things without thinking about them, but I don't know, maybe because you're just naturally like drawn to them somehow. But yeah, it kind of felt like that was something I didn't want to do without after that.
And did you have like a strong idea of the type of music you wanted to make? Like obviously around that time, it's a lot of, the libertines and all that. Were you kind of, I don't know, did you want to kind of remove yourself from that kind of thing?
I mean, not consciously, but I just think, I think just the music that we're into was quite different, maybe from a lot of those bands, and I mean, the whole, there wasn't, before the Horrors began, I think, like, as we left school, Tom said, "Oh yeah, when we leave, we're going to move to London and we're going to start a garage band and we're all going to wear black." That was kind of the extent of the planning that went into the Horrors. I think I kind of, in some ways, got lucky with the people that I met. I mean, I met Josh, who's builds all his own gear and, like, was into no wave and a lot of kind of music that relies on quite kind of primal expression and is more about, instinct. And I think because that was the kind of music we're into and that was the kind of music we want to make, it made our path to being a band a little more direct. Like if we'd want to be in a prog band, we'd have had to rehearse for, a couple of years and whatever. It would have been very different. But I mean, that's the appeal of any kind of punk, isn't it? It's like, it's so within your grasp. And
we've had Neil's Children on, who've like talked about a bit of a scene that was going on in, was it Southend with the junk club and stuff? Like, how important was all that kind of scene?
It was. I mean, because it was another thing that was removed from what was going on in London, and it was a really cool self-contained scene. I mean, these New Puritans came out of that as well. I don't know if you remember the Violets. They were another good band that played around there. And yeah, Neil's Children were sort of like a little bit before, and then they were kind of playing. They were continuing to play around when we came up. But Southend was really cool because it was this whole gang of kids listening to really good music that you wouldn't hear anywhere else. Like it was just as much about discovering stuff that you liked as anything else. And I think that's the best kind of club. I wonder what's going to replace that stuff. When because you don't get those kind of club nights happening as much anymore. I guess it'll happen a different way.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've talked about on the podcast, like how, I don't know, a lot of people say that there's not that kind of exclusive scene anymore, and it's very different for bands now.
There's so much of a breathing ground. Like you go to these places and then you'll see some band playing something in a certain way, and it'll maybe make you think, oh, I could do something that incorporates elements of that, whatever. I mean, do people really get all their inspiration from Instagram? It's just such a different thing. I wonder what will be missing. I guess it'll just be a different way. Like you could pretty much go any night of the week and see some band playing that were kind of creating a bit of a buzz in the industry. And I remember there was this other band called the Litlands or something, and they had a similar kind of like post-Libertines following, and I think Pete Doherty even sang with them at one point. I don't know, but there were tons of those bands.
Yeah, we actually had a guy called Ronnie Joyce on who was in the Little.
Oh yeah, I know Ronnie. Yeah, he played tambourine.
Yeah, I think he said he was knocking around with you guys in New York or something.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to Ronnie for quite a few years. He's a club promoter mainly. Yeah, I think I actually met him possibly at a Litlands gig because they were playing with this band that I used to really like called Selfish Cunt. Do you remember them?
It's one of those bands that have cropped up time and time again on the podcast, people saying how good they were.
Yeah, they were really good. And also it was, I mean, I remember I saw them when I was like 15 or 16 at the garage. And I remember he was like, Martin from Selfish Cunt came out and he was wearing, like this sort of like sheer negligee and a pair of sunglasses and nothing else. And that just completely blew my mind because he was like throwing himself on everyone and like, chucking their beer at them and, like kissing them and then running back on stage and fucking smashing the mic in his face. It was nuts, but such a great gig.
Yeah, and I was watching the Counting in Fives documentary, and he said, regards to songwriting, everything was quite democratic. Was that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it still is. It's a long and winding approach to being in a band. but then it does also make some unique results. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, I've never been in a band that works in any other way, so I can't say what's better. But yeah, that's how we do it.
And obviously in that same documentary, it's all in America, I think. But
yeah, it's on tour. Yeah,
you kind of get an idea of that you want to be, you want to make live gigs like a special event, really. And at one point in the documentary, or even you go to the back of the room with a microphone and start trying to play Space Invaders, and you're like asking people for change. It's kind of
yeah, I mean, but it's weird because a lot of this stuff, because I don't really drink very often, but the person I am on stage is so different. I guess it must be the way I react to adrenaline or something, because I don't even recognize myself sometimes if I see that stuff back. It's so weird. I mean, I guess it was just like a natural reaction to playing stuff that's that aggressive, because you sort of, I don't know, you just sort of turn into someone else. So it's weird. It was just never, none of that stuff was conscious. That was what was weird about it. It just kind of all, you know, it sort of like turned into this thing organically.
But a lot of people have said the initial success is just a bit of a whirlwind. You don't really kind of remember what was going on and how you were feeling. It all kind of happens around you. Like, what do you remember of it?
Well, I think when stuff happens that quickly, you assume that it's going to be like a linear, like upward path where you're just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger forever, you know. And I think I feel like maybe people don't very often talk about how much, I think, being in a band, like how much your sort of like exposure is going to fluctuate. Like, you know, like one year people will be listening to your records, and then, you know, another year, I mean, you see it with you know, like when about 5 years ago suddenly everyone started listening to the Jesus and Mary Chain again, and then they were like playing Brixton Academy, and you know what I mean. I think it's unpredictable, and I think the longer I'm in a band, I guess the more I appreciate the sort of like, you know, it's easy to miss the really cool things about being in a band, because there's so much happening, and because it's happening so quickly, you know, you can sort of like not take it for granted, but not actually appreciate what's going on, you know. And actually it's a pretty insane thing that this is my job, you know.
Yeah, we've had a few people, like I think Gary Jarman said if there's one thing he could change, it's probably to enjoy things a bit more back in the day, but he said he was just very almost suspicious of kind of everything that was going on. Yeah,
because I guess they had quite a sort of dedicated fan base as well, didn't they? Like they had, like, you know, people following them around everywhere, and it was, I guess, not that dissimilar to the Libertines.
Like another thing they said is like that what's different to you, they kind of had a gradual incline kind of thing. I suppose you were thrown into it a bit more.
Yeah, we had to kind of learn being in a band while we were doing it.
And yeah, like we talked to Neil's children and about, you know, like kind of things that were going around the NME, the kind of the scene that was, they were pulling together. And obviously you guys were on the front of the NME at one point. I just wondered, like, what was your relationship like with that kind of scene? Like, were you comfortable being on the front of the NME? Were you loving it, or were you wary of it, or how do you...
We were a little wary of it. I think we were a little wary of it just because, well, I mean, even just the way, you know, the way they write sometimes. But I mean, I think it did seem quick. And I think also maybe the thing is, I feel like I'm saying this like I'm dissatisfied with the way it went or something, and that's not true at all. But I mean, I think it's just if you're outside of that situation and you're seeing this band come up from nowhere and suddenly they're on the cover of the NME or cover of any, like, you know, big magazine as it was at the time, you know, when they've only released one single, you can't help but question, you know, whether they deserve it or whatever. So in that sense, maybe, you know, in an ideal world, it would have happened more gradually, but that's just not the way things work, you know. And we did have an exciting thing going, especially when we began, when there was so much of a similar kind of thing happening in London. And then, and that's why Same thing with the Klaxons, and because it was a very similar deal for them, although they were more pop. They had this whole kind of gang of kids who sort of like dressed a certain way, and this whole sort of like minor subculture around them and stuff like that. You have no control over. So I don't know. It definitely felt weird at the time, but then we were just desperately trying to write songs.
So that's a good link to the first album. Like, I noticed you had 6 different producers on the first album. Is that right?
Yeah, well, so the reason for that was we didn't do the album as an album. It was literally just whenever we had a couple of weeks free from touring, which wasn't very often, we would get some songs together and go and record them. So there wasn't the first album. It wasn't like we did the album sessions. That's like a document of our first year as a band. So there's like this, all the first singles, which were all done at different times. And then we got, I think, the last 4 or 5 tracks together at the very end. The first time we actually had the experience of going somewhere to record an entire album was on Primary Colours. I
guess the name that jumps out to me and maybe other people that be listening to the podcast is Nick Zinner, who produced how many did he produce? A few songs on that first album?
Yeah, he did a couple. Yeah, he did. Actually, I think he only did one that was actually he did a couple of songs with us, but one of them was a B-side. But I mean, Nick, we played with the AES a few times, and he's just a great musician, isn't he? Really, Nick. I mean, he's like, he's the AES. I think one of my favourite bands from that period. I still listen to their records. I think they were just a really special band.
Yeah, definitely. I was listening to their first album again recently. It's just one of those kind of timeless albums, and it's a bit like Sex Pistols or something. It just never sounds old.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it wasn't that long ago I listened to it, and it still has the same power. But even some of their later stuff, I mean, I really like that. It's either called Is or ISIS EP. It's got Rockers to Swallow on it, and the drumming is so muscular, and there's tons of stuff they've done that I really like. I spoke to Nick the other day, actually, for the first time in a while.
Oh, cool. Is he still in New York?
He's in LA. He's
right.
He's moved to a haunted house.
Right.
Or he says, which glad of the company, he says.
He's got the right style for a haunted house, hasn't he?
No, well, that's the thing. It almost seems too good to be true, doesn't it? But there you go.
I guess going back to that Counting in 5 documentary, it's quite funny when you're walking around and you said that people always thought you were the Beatles or shouting the Beatles at you.
I've had the whole lot. I've had Elvis shouted at me. I don't know why. It's but yeah, nice to be compared to people with great talent.
Yeah. But it was really cool playing the small venues as well, doing that tour.
Oh man, I really missed that stuff, to be honest. Those kind of shows. I mean, we had some really insane experiences in small venues. I mean, there was one show we did in Spain that was like, there was practically a riot. It wasn't so much us against the crowd. It was more us and the crowd against the security. But it ended up with like 7 people went to hospital and stuff. It was fucking nuts.
Jeez.
Missed that stuff.
Just going back to like the image of the band and everything, I was reading an NME article about you getting in a fight down Whitechapel Road because someone took objection to the way you were dressed or something.
Oh yeah, I had a tooth knocked out. Yeah.
He said something like you were a boy or a girl or something. He said.
Yeah, basically. I mean, it is weird. It seems weird that stuff would happen in London, because even in 15 years it's changed so much. Yeah, I mean, every time we went out, someone would comment about our dress, which seems ridiculous. I mean, I would say that it's, but I think it's kind of cool that the way someone looks has the power to provoke someone so much. And I think I feel like all my favorite bands kind of like you really need the people, you need to provoke strong reactions either way. And I think the strong negative reactions are just as important. I think it not necessarily shows that what you're doing has value, but at least you're making people feel something, you know. I think it's I don't know, I would always hope that music and stuff around it has the power to affect people in that way, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say, did it kind of almost strengthen your resolve, your identity when you came up against stuff like that?
Well, in a way, because it does give you like a gang mentality. I mean, it's tribal, isn't it? And in some ways that's the way that you get hassled, because you're you know, threatening someone else's idea of their identity, I guess. But I just think provocation is so important, you know, not for its own sake, but it's just such an important aspect of things that have substance in the end.
Yeah, I mean, we had Adam Firechick on from Baby Shambles last time.
Yeah.
He kind of thinks that's missing from music now, that kind of almost that anger, or like you say, provocation in people's music. But
I don't think
that's a sweeping statement.
That just sounds like a bit of a granddad thing to say. You know what I mean? Because there's so much provocation in what's going on at the moment. And actually, I would say that there's some really cool and provocative stuff happening in pop. I think he's right in the sense that there's a bit of anger missing in certain areas, but I don't know. I think it's just come through differently now, and I think it can be a mistake to look back and sort of like assume that your form of expression was the right one, because, you know, growing, like, kids are always going to grow up and deal with similar issues and feel similar frustrations. So that stuff is always going to get, you know, find an outlet somewhere. It's just going to maybe come through in a slightly different way to the way you remember it. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I think what I've realised from doing this podcast is if you look for it, it's there, kind of thing.
Exactly. You can always find it. And there's like people, you know, there's no bad period for music. There's like amazing records made every single year. Yeah,
and I suppose, you know, the way people talk about different scenes over the years, I mean, this is the first kind of era where the internet's had a major impact, and it's always going to be different, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, and also it can be quite revisionist, because, you know, you think of like classic bands that you love. I mean, take the Sex Pistols or take, I don't know, the Gun Club or the Cramps or whoever. Like they you know, their early seminal gigs would have been to like fucking 10 people, you know? And then it gets written about like it was this life-changing thing. I mean, I'm sure it was for the people there, but, you know, it's such a tiny cross-section of people. And then it sort of like grows in stature and importance as people talk about it. So, I don't know. I think it's important to be realistic with that stuff.
Maybe it was a quote from the documentary where he said the importance of lyrics meaning something.
I was like 18, give me a break.
Yeah, but I guess other songwriters, like you hear some, I think people like Liam Gallagher say he doesn't know what half his songs mean. But was that something you always intended, was like a lot of meaning behind your lyrics?
I don't know if Noel is the best person to ask for that stuff. I mean, I think, you know, he's obviously got different priorities. I think, for me, I can't write any other way. I mean, what I will say is it can be difficult expressing emotions in a pure way when you're working democratically, because I think it's just the nature of the way the songs are built. They'll take twists that maybe you didn't intend, and that can be what makes them great as well. But I think like that's a real challenge of working with other people when you don't have like total control of everything that's happening, and it's not like, you know, not completely you know, when you're not. Yeah, when it's not done by one songwriter, it's a different thing. I think it's just for me, like the way I've written, it's just I get more out of it. I can't can't feel the same thing unless it's coming from like, I don't know, coming from that place where it's got that kind of connection.
So yeah, moving on to that second album and just try and get an idea of how things change for bands. Like by that point, did you feel a pressure to produce, or how did like dynamics change at that point, or if they did at all?
Well, the first thing that happened was we got dropped.
Right.
So we did 4 or 5 demos for Primary Colours, and I think most of them were songs that ended up on the album. And Polydor, by the way, at this point, most people that we've been working with had been fired. That's just the nature of being on a major label. You know, like the team is not going to be the team for long. But they heard these songs and they were like, they're not going to get on the radio. And we were kind of like, we were surprised because we thought they were big hits. You know, we thought we'd written like, I mean, by our standards at the time, they were quite commercial. I mean, they were like accessible anyway. They weren't like, I guess looking at it realistically, they weren't that commercial, but they were melodic, whatever. And I think we had our same manager, so it wasn't like we panicked or anything. It was more just like we like these and we want to keep working on them. And we got signed by XL like a couple of weeks later, so it wasn't like, you know, I suppose we couldn't help but question what we were doing to some extent, but then we were also really excited by these new songs that we'd written, so it was sort of like offset.
Yeah, so you had the songs basically, you weren't struggling to produce the songs at that point?
No, because we hadn't actually, you know, like I mentioned earlier, it was like that was the first time we'd actually had the chance to sit and try and write a complete album. So we were just excited to get to do that for the first time and to have time as well, like rather than desperately trying to get something together between gigs.
Yeah.
We went away and like, you know, we set up in a rehearsal room and set all our gear up and started recording the demos. So that, you know, looking back on that, it was a really exciting and like creatively rewarding time.
Yeah, because there seems to be two sides of it when I ask people that question. Like one side of it is, like you say, you get the time and the money, especially, I don't know if it's the same with you guys, but a lot of the bands we spoke to like got the advances, which meant they had the time to write songs. But then the other side of that, like people like Dominic Masters kind of threw that question in my face a bit and was like, you don't get any time at that point. It's all like 100 miles an hour. But I guess there's a balance to it, I suppose.
I mean, it didn't feel like, there wasn't a huge amount of time because, you know, like if you've done, and especially because it was like, it felt like we had this kind of wave of, hype really and press. Like we're doing, looking back, I can't believe how much press we did with the Horrors. I mean, especially on those first couple of albums, there was a point where it was like, you know, almost every day we were doing some kind of press. And it felt like there was a lot of pressure to get it done because, you know, we just released our first album, we've been on tour, and it's almost like now we find out whether or not we actually have the skills needed to be in a band, you know, because I feel like anyone can sort of like through enthusiasm and excitement can get through doing a first album, but then when you have just even like a few weeks to take stock and then think, okay, I've got to do it again, you know, a second one can be difficult. But then once we went away and we started writing, I think it was just more than anything, we just wanted people to hear the songs because we felt like we'd done something that was cool, you know.
And was that more self-produced, that second album?
No, the second one. So I mean, we wrote all the songs and we had them demoed, and they were like start to finish done. And then we went to see Portishead, who just released their third album. And we thought, you know, Geoff Barrow would be a really cool guy to produce this record because, you know, he's like amazing sonic textures he creates and like you know, Portishead are an incredible band, like, you know, atmospheric, all this stuff. And then when he heard the songs, he was like, oh yeah, we should just record these as they are. And we were thinking at the time, we were kind of like disappointed. We were thinking like, what, you know, we wanted you to turn us into the Horrors plus Portishead. But he was like, yeah, you just got to do it as they are. They're good as they are. And looking back, that's what a good producer should do. You know, it's like you listen to songs and you figure out what they need. And if what they need is just to be, you know, the best version of themselves, then that's what you do. You don't just like put your stamp on it for the sake of it. But he was the one who said, you know, for your next album after this one, just do it yourselves because it's all kind of ready to go. And I think if he hadn't said that, I think maybe we may not have had the confidence to do it on the third one.
Yeah, maybe you sometimes need someone that's kind of got an objective opinion that kind of gives you that push or that confidence. Yeah,
especially when there's not one guy who's sort of like in charge of the entire band. I think it's an objective opinion can be really valuable. Yeah.
Obviously, your sound had kind of progressed at that point. Would you say, I don't know how to describe it, like a bit more psychedelic or less kind of direct? I don't know how he'd say that, but
well, yeah, I mean, it got a bit more obscured and like I suppose the aggression was sort of like a bit more subtle. I mean, you know, I suppose we'd learned a little bit of nuance as opposed to just like barreling through things as quick as we possibly could. I mean, you know, we really did learn to play our instruments from being in the band. I mean, like, you know, all of us apart from, I mean, Josh was more guitarist. Josh was more like into building things than actually playing, I guess. But he had more musical knowledge than the rest of us. I mean, Reese had never, you know, he'd never played organ before or something. And it was very instinctive. But then I think the idea of it being any other way, it wouldn't have worked out the same way.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to people like Luke Jenner who said it's almost more important to have people that are like-minded rather than people who can play instruments well.
That's totally true.
It seems to be a theme of quite a lot of bands we've talked to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I think it's so kind of like inspiring when you learn that as well. Like when you sort of like realize that all your favorite bands, that's so often the case. It's like, you know, people just sort of like pick things up and pick instruments up and figure out a way of transmitting their personality through them just by, you know, like they figure out how to make a noise that will somehow sort of like work in that way. I think it's cool. It's so much more important than learning scales.
What's your reaction like to that second album then? Were you happy with the way it went down kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were pleased. I mean, Geoff practically had a nervous breakdown at the end of it because we drove insane. But apart from that, yeah, we were happy. I mean, it took ages to mix. I think with any music that's kind of like quite layered, there's about 80% of the process where it just sounds terrible. And then you sort of like learn to be patient with it and like realize that the mixing is going to be so much. Because I mean, we did, to be honest, we did a lot of it live. I mean, there's like, you know, I think one of the tracks was pretty much, you know, one take. I mean, vocally at least. But yeah, there was quite a lot of, because we had the chance to be in a studio, we were figuring out how to use a lot of the gear for the first time, so that was cool.
Yeah, is it kind of like that thing you hear about artists where you kind of need to know when to leave it alone or put the brush down kind of thing? Yeah,
well, I think that's one of the most valuable skills you can learn, like that and knowing when to give the job to someone else, you know, like delegating. It's those two things are I don't know, God, like it's probably most of what you need, I would say.
And I always like to ask people about different TV appearances, and obviously asked you about Soccer AM, but also wanted to ask you about Mighty Boosh.
Oh yeah,
is it the Black Tubes, the band you're in?
Yeah, I mean that was a different experience to anything else we did. I guess.
Did you get on quite well with Noel Fielding?
Kind of. I don't know.
I just assumed that was the connection. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he liked the music. I mean, I don't know. Noel and I have a little bit of a weird thing. I don't know.
Fair enough.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it was cool being on the show. It was fun. I'm trying to think what. I guess that. Yeah, I quite liked the show. It kind of reminded me of like a warped take on all the sort of weird puppet shows I used to watch when I was a kid.
Still watch the first series now, and it's like as good as anything, really.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't anything like that on TV at the time, was there? I remember it was on like something like 6 or 7 o'clock on Channel 3 or something.
I don't know. I guess you would have been playing a lot of major gigs around that time. Like, is there any gigs you look back on from that point where you remember fondly, kind of thing?
I mean, the ones that I love the most are the small ones. You know, like I was saying before, like it's such a different. I mean, I can tell you which gigs I hated the most.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Probably we did this stadium tour with Muse,
Right.
and it was just. It was, I don't know. I don't know what. It felt so. I mean, it felt so sterile. It was like playing in a hospital or something. It was like, I don't know. I'm sure if you're in a stadium and they're all your fans, it's a different thing. But it felt so impersonal somehow. And we've done stadium tours that I've really enjoyed, like, you know, shows that I've really loved doing. But that, for some reason, that tour in particular, I remember it felt so far away from what I love about performing and being in a band, you know. But yeah, I mean, about the gigs that I love, they're always the ones where you get like a direct connection with the audience, I think, because it's like it's such a cool thing having that exchange of energy with people.
I think Neil's Children supported you on one of your tours at one point, didn't they?
Yeah, they've played with us loads of times.
So is it quite good when, I don't know, like when you go on tour with a band that you really get on with, does that make a big difference?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. But also, I think even just it's weird how when you go on tour, even taking one friend or like the addition of one other person can completely change the whole dynamic. You know, it can make like the entire experience different or more fun for everyone, or like more relaxed, or it can completely fuck it up and you can take the wrong person and and there's like a bad vibe. But it's there's so much of a psychological aspect to being in a band. You know, like you've got to get on with people and you've got to make sure people's opinions feel heard. And like, yeah, I don't know. It's so much about relating to people, you know, even just beyond like the music. It's just about on a day-to-day basis because otherwise nothing will get done, you know.
No, you mean I was only in a band for a short time, but our guitarist brother used to come to our gigs and just his presence used to kind of get rid of the tension for some reason.
Yeah.
Just so it wasn't all us together, it wasn't as intense.
Yeah, and like people are different when someone new's around or like someone familiar's around it. Yeah, it's weird. It can make such a huge difference.
Yeah, just moving into that Skyen album, like, was it kind of more of the same, or how did you approach it?
Well, because it was like, I guess it was another thing again, because we had the chance to produce an album ourselves. I guess, I mean, it didn't feel like it at the time, but I in some ways we made the process easier by having a sort of like different goal every time. You know, like the second one was, you know, the first time we got to actually be in a studio and do this kind of like body of work. And then the third one was right, we get to produce an album ourselves, you know, and I think it was another different challenge. So I think on that level, yeah, it was cool. But yeah, I guess that album is probably, yeah, I mean, it must be one of our biggest ones.
Did you have your own studio at that point as well?
Yeah, we did. I mean, Josh had extended his interest from building guitar pedals to building preamps, and like he basically built the whole thing. Like he built like all the equipment, and yeah, we set up our own studio.
Then yeah, just going back to Still Life, just because personally I just remember kind of being blown away by it, to be fair. Like, what was the songwriting process for that like? Like, do you have some songs where you know it's going to be a big song? Like, I've talked to people where they say there's no way you can predict kind of the reaction.
When you ask people that, do Do you think they're telling the truth? What do you think? What say?
Well, I remember asking Luke Jenner about House of Jealous Lovers. And he did a bit of a humble brag, to be fair. He's a bit like, you can never predict when you're going to change your face of music, pretty much.
Jesus Christ. I mean, it's a great song.
Yeah. But most people say you get a good vibe about a song, but you can't really predict.
I think you definitely get a good vibe after it's done, or like half taken shape. Yeah, and I think we definitely got that feeling with Still Life. It was actually the first song that we wrote for the Skying sessions, and it kind of came together in a day, like the whole thing, you know, like lyrics and music, and it was just one of those ones where we were all enthusiastic about getting in there and writing new songs, and it came together very directly, and we knew that it was a good one. I think I don't think you can ever really predict how people are going to receive it, but you can definitely predict how successful you've been at doing something that you think is cool, you know, which is basically, I mean, that's enough for me, you know. Like, I think if I made a record that I really loved and no one heard it for 20 years, I don't think it would necessarily make me that much less satisfied with it. If I was convinced that I'd done something that I was proud of, I don't necessarily think that would matter so much. I mean, obviously I want people to hear things, but you know, that level of like satisfaction when you feel like you've, you know, something is like you've transmitted something in the way you wanted to. That's so much. It's one of the biggest parts of being in a band for me.
Yeah, definitely. Like, you're writing for yourself, you're not writing for the reaction, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, people say that, and I'm sure, like, you know, on one level you're thinking about the reaction a little bit, but not really, though, because yeah, when I think about it, I've never once like thought, oh yeah, people will like this bit, or, you know what I mean? It's just, or that's just not the way I think. I'm sure, I mean, you know, but then again, maybe bigger, more successful artists do think that way, and maybe you should think that way, but it's just not the way I've ever thought.
You don't hear many stories about good songs where people are trying to write to please the audience or make a big hit, really, do you, to be fair?
You know, I think probably some, but then again, maybe those people don't get interviewed, because if you think about someone like Max Martin, who writes a lot of the Britney Spears stuff or whatever, that's exactly what he's doing, and he's really successful at it.
True.
So, you know, it's just a different way of looking at music. And I think because when I've worked on pop stuff, like writing for other people, it's more like a jigsaw puzzle. And it's kind of a cool thing because it's like a totally different way of working. But it's not the kind of way I could work in a band.
Is it kind of a different satisfaction at the end?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily less satisfaction. It's just a different type. It's like you're trying to, it's like the closest thing I can compare it to is a puzzle. You're trying to find the right pieces for the right gaps. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily less satisfying, because I really enjoy doing pop stuff. It's just I think you transmit a different kind of emotion.
Like you said, obviously, like a democratic writing style. Was that the kind of the same with Still Life? Were you all just kind of sat in the same room?
Yeah, we were playing, and we hadn't figured out. I think most people at least try and write at like a kind of reasonable volume, you know, like. But we used to just turn all our amps on full and like play together in a room for hours, which was deafening, and most of the band have chronic tinnitus as a result. But yeah, we were all sort of playing for ages, and just, yeah, we're not great at planning as a band, you know. We're not great at sort of like thinking, okay, we're going to try this direction, or we're going to try this style, we're going to try this type of song. It's very instinctive.
I think it was NME's best album of 2012. Is that kind of how do you react to that? Is that kind of a satisfying thing when it happens?
I think it's a satisfying thing if it's something you're proud of. I think, I don't know, like with any of these things, it's so easy to like, I think sometimes listening to the good things written or said about yourself can be just as damaging as the negative things, because it can distort your idea of what you're trying to achieve. So, you know, I don't know. I think it has to be sort of like not taken too seriously, you know. It's cool when things get recognised, of course it is.
And you played Still Life at the NME Awards that year, I think, with Florence.
Yeah.
How did that kind of come about?
I can't really remember. I mean, she's sort of like, Florence has kind of been around a similar kind of like London scene for a few years, and we knew her a little bit, and yeah, she asked us to support on her tour and, you know, things like that. But, you know, I think it's just cool to do these sort of like different things for that kind of event. You know, I think it's just, you know, it's just a fun thing to do that is a bit different. And, you know, I don't really think too much about it. I just think it's like one of those weird one-off things that you do that is fun at the time, you know?
Yeah, we've talked to people about the NME Awards who said it's just a bit of a surreal and funny experience, really.
It is, but it is, and it's fun, and I miss those kind of events because they don't happen so often anymore. I think I think it's. I mean, I never took it that seriously. I remember one year I paid a stripper to accept or to present an award in my place. He dressed up as me, and some people actually thought he was me, which was embarrassing. I guess people. I gave him my coat and an Edward Scissorhands wig, and yet some people, I guess some slightly blind A&R people at the back of the room, actually thought that it had been me the whole time. I just think those shows. I remember the Arctic Monkeys used to do it well. They used to like accept awards and not really take it very seriously, and like come all dressed in hunting outfits or whatever, and like, you know, say thank you to all the members of the Brit School. And I just, I thought they were funny.
Just going back to your own studio and everything, is that kind of how you do things now in your own studio?
No, we kept the studio for a couple of years, and we did the fourth album in it. But it just started to, for one thing, it was freezing cold. We could never get the heating right. It was freezing cold even in summer. It somehow managed to be colder in there than it was outside. And it was, we'd been in there for too long. I think it's been turned into an escape room now, which I guess is not that different from what it was. Right. We were there. But yeah, I think those things just, there's a course, you know, there's like they serve their purpose and then you move on. But yeah, I don't know, we work a lot more remotely now. I guess a lot of people do. And
I saw for your latest album, you ended up working with Paul Epworth.
Yes.
Yeah, how did you come to that decision kind of thing?
Well, Paul was a fan of the band, and what actually happened was his label signed us. And then because he's got like, it's interesting with Paul, because I mean, he's really, you know, like obviously like a top producer, but he's also got quite an interesting background in, you know, in sound and he knows so much about gear and the amount of amazing stuff that he played, like just when we were sort of, you know, we'd like be walking in the studio and he'd be messing around with on the synths, whatever, and creating these really, really cool things. And it seemed like, maybe on the surface it doesn't seem like an obvious choice, but I think he actually, because we wanted a producer for that record, because we'd sort of like spent the last 5 years just working on our own, really, quite in an insular way. I think we wanted someone to kind of like to push us and give that objective opinion and to offer input that none of us would be able to offer, you know.
Yeah, in terms of like new music, then, and if you've been working towards a new album.
Yeah, well, we're doing it. We are at some point going to release a new album, but we're doing a load of EPs first. So our first of those new EPs is going to be out at the end of February or mid-February. So sometime around, like, I think it's around mid to late February, our first EP is out. Because we've kind of just been sat on it because, obviously we can't tour it and stuff, and everyone was kind of waiting to see how the situation developed. But it's just got to the point now where we want to put it out, and that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, was that with Paul Epworth again?
No. So we've done this ourselves again.
Right.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It's hard to predict what we're going to do, but I think I'd be up for working with a producer again in future. I think definitely have to be the right person. But yeah, I think I don't know. Things are just made in such a different way now to how they were when, like when we were on Polydor and like first getting signed. It's a different. I mean, for one thing, you can do amazing sounding things at home. Like. You don't really need to go into a massive studio to do it, and maybe that kind of rawness is going to be a cool thing. I think it is on this EP.
So you're kind of more of like a raw sound.
It is quite raw. I mean, there's still a lot of electronic stuff, but yeah, it's a little more raw.
I was thinking about that recently. Like, when is it going to get to that? I suppose we've already reached it, really, but when we're going to get to the point where, like you say, you don't need to go into a big studio with a big producer.
Yeah, I think we're practically at that point. I mean, like a lot of pop artists. I mean, I did a songwriting session on Zoom like a month or so ago, and I didn't think that would work. Like, not only songwriting, but we even recorded it. Like, it was like me, the artist, and a producer, and me and the singer were writing the song, and then she was sending like voice recordings back and forth with the producer, and he was just like putting them into the session and like roughly drawing up layers around it, and we kind of got this pretty cool and definitely very professional sounding demo at the end of it. I just think that's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, it's more about what you're doing now, really, Faris. Like, we haven't really mentioned your band Cat Size.
Yeah, Cat Size.
3 albums you got with them,
yeah. I guess we sort of like going more towards film soundtracks, but I don't know. I think I'm kind of, Rachel and I kind of in feeling like we're about ready to make another record. So I think it feels like it would be fun to do it, and she has so many ideas. It's kind of like we could do stuff endlessly. So I think that's the one thing I wish is that I had enough time to do both things full time, because if Cat Size, I mean, we could do an album every year if that's all we worked on.
Yeah, is Rachel's background in opera, is it?
Yeah, she used to be an opera singer, and then she'd sort of like, when I met her, she'd pretty much given up music, but we started writing songs together, and it sort of it started as a kind of fun bedroom project and sort of expanded, and then I made the mistake of signing to Polydor again. But then, can't argue with that advance. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just Cat Size has been like a thing that I at the time, I'd always wanted to do something influenced by girl groups. And, yeah, we did that. And it's just turned into something else.
Yeah, like you mentioned, you're producing for other bands like people like Happy Meal Limited.
Yeah.
And I remember my mate saying they're one of the best bands he's ever seen live, but I've never seen them myself. But
oh, they're great. Yeah,
do you enjoy all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I love producing. I worked with a band called The Ninth Wave recently as well. Yeah, I really enjoy it. It's just a different thing. It's a different challenge. And it's cool working with a whole bunch of people that you've never met and sort of figuring out how to get the best out of them, it's cool having that exchange, that kind of like collaborative thing, and figuring out what someone's into and like what they respond to and stuff. I think it's that psychological element again. It's like it's such a different thing from making music with your own band. Yeah,
like we talked to Paddingtons about working with Owen Morris, and it's almost like he almost had like a football manager approach, like trying to get the best out of each individual with like different methods.
I'm not sure how many drug tests will get passed if I
Yeah, the Maradona.
Yeah, have you seen that video? Maradona on the field when the guy runs up and gives him a bump of coke.
Yeah.
And then his eyes are he's proper bug eyes. Yeah, it's amazing.
And then when he's manager of that team in Mexico, at one point, all the coaches gather around him.
Yeah.
Leave him to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you kind of have to get a bit of a manager's head on? I don't know if manager's the right term, but you know what I mean? You kind of different.
It's more like, I don't know.
Or like a mentor.
Well, I mean, mentor sounds fucking like an egomaniac, doesn't it? It sounds like Phil Spector on you, but like, I don't know. I think it's different because people are at such different stages of their development. You know, like it can be, you can meet some 17-year-old who knows exactly what they want. Actually, in fact, I did. I mean, I worked with a band called Let's Eat Grandma, which I co-produced with Sophie. And they were, I think, 17, and they were already working on their second album. And they both, Jenny and Rosa, two girls from Norwich, but they both knew exactly what they wanted. And like, even if they didn't know everything about the gear, they knew they could express what they meant, and they knew their own taste, and like they knew what they wanted to end up with. And like, it was so cool working with them. You know, they had so much energy and like enthusiasm and yeah, I don't know. It's really rewarding trying to get inside someone else's head and figure out what they want, and then like figure out what's best for the song, and find out what the closest area is that satisfied both of those things. Did
you set up your own record label? Was it Raff Records?
Yeah, briefly did. I just sort of like, well, I'm not entirely sure where the money was coming from. I think it was some kind of like tax avoidance scheme, but basically, someone agreed to fund this label, and I put out a few things on it. But like, I mean, that was, I don't know if anyone heard them, but we did this like pretty cool double 7-inch compilation of a load of bands that I really liked at the time. Skinny Girl Diet were on it. Another band called Puffer. And it's just a really cool record. And I think it's one of those things that I hope someone will discover in a record shop in 20 years and just sort of like find, you know, like think of as this kind of like weird, like oddity, you know. I love stuff like that. It's like, I mean, I don't even know if people will interact with records in the same way, but you know, that kind of discovery and finding random stuff that you connect with is, you know, that like personal aspect of connecting with music is so important.
When it comes to writing for other people, like, is it a case of, do you get like a project that you'll be given, or is it more you'll come up with a song and think that'll sound better for someone else?
It's usually people approaching me and saying, do you want to like try writing together? And then you'll sort of like see what happens.
Right, okay.
Or they'll ask me to produce, or, you know, just it's I don't know. I suppose one of the cool things about the Horrors is that although, like, you know, we've sort of done okay, we maybe have like still have some kind of like niche appeal to people who have like a personal connection with the music. And then I think it's, you know, it's like if you're in Maroon 5, no one's going to ask you to produce their record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just a different thing. I think if there's like, if there's a bit more of a personal connection to music, I think it's maybe people get a clearer idea of your taste and what, you know, how maybe you could work on something else, you know.
Would you say there's been a high point of being in the band?
Yeah, Soccer AM. I'm not kidding.
Fair play, yeah.
Not joking. I was so happy after that.
Yeah, what was it like when that ball went in? You must have been like, did you want to celebrate a bit more?
Yeah, well, you know, because again, I like off camera, I don't know how, I mean, she knew exactly what the camera was looking at, but the presenter kind of like gave me this look that that sort of like said she was basically just pissed off that I'd scored. Yeah, I was happy. That was a good day.
The title of the video on YouTube's good as well. It's like Faris scores an absolute screamer or something.
Yeah, it's never going to be
world-class goal.
It's never going to be Serge from Kasabian's one, though, is it?
Yeah, this was over the top, wasn't it?
I know, and then he went and played in the charity match and lobbed David Seaman as well. I mean, you know, how can you? You can only dream of such things.
Yeah. Like, it's impressive, but also annoying. Is there anything you would do differently about any of your time in the band?
I just don't think that's the way you can look at things. You know, it's so much of it comes from like being an idiot and just like falling into things. You know, and that lack of fear and sense of consequence is what makes people achieve things. You know. And
then in terms of new bands like starting out now, like how would you anticipate it would be different for the Horrors if they were starting out today? Like, what would you think the challenges would be?
I mean, I don't know. I think in some ways, I feel like the way the Horrors appeal to people would always appeal to people. I'm not necessarily talking about the music, but in terms of like the excitement. I think whenever it's similar when Happy Meal Limited started. I think when a new band comes along and there's like a really strong visual aesthetic and the music is exciting, I think that will kind of like transmit in any era. You know, I think people are always going to respond to certain things. But yeah, I mean, Happy Meal Limited are great. When I first saw them, it was like I was so excited to see a new band that were that good, you know. But yeah, I think it's a shame that they signed to a major label straight away because I think I don't know. I think that made things difficult for them.
We've had people who think, you know, like the money and the pay through from Spotify and the lack of advances now will hamper bands starting out. Do you think that's true or not really?
I mean, the streaming services have to start paying people properly, otherwise there's going to be like a revolt and they're going to end up with nothing to promote. I think it's so badly structured at the moment that it's going to have to change pretty soon. Makes things very difficult I think most musicians now have to have a second job, which is not necessarily a problem, but I just think it's not sustainable. I think, you know, you want to go on tour and stuff or whatever. Music is definitely undervalued, and you know that's just it will change. It's just how long it's going to take.
Yeah, we had a band called Kiwi Junior on who've just released a second album through Sub Pop, but like you said, they've all got second jobs as well, which is hard to believe. But
yeah, and that's the thing. People assume like you get signed, whatever, but. You know, and then you can immediately quit your job and move to a mansion. But on the other hand, it's like you get so much reward from doing this stuff. I guess that's what labels kind of like play off. You know, it's like they think that you're willing to be poor forever to achieve your dream, and I guess a lot of people are.
And yeah, obviously, you mentioned you got a good story about, is it Liam Gallagher?
Oh man, yeah.
So looking forward to this.
Right. Okay. Well, there's a lot of different elements to it, so I'll try and get them in order. So it's not necessarily the kind of night out that I would typically have, but nonetheless, one evening in London, I went out with Miles Kane, Liam Gallagher, Liam's lesser-known brother Paul Gallagher. Who definitely doesn't have a chip on his shoulder about being the one brother not in Oasis. Leighton Baines, and who else was it? I can't remember. There was someone else there. Anyway, we were in London and we went to see Jack White play solo show at Alexandra Palace. Rachel was with me as well, but I mean, you know, Rachel's often with me, so that's you know. So we went out and we met at some bar beforehand, and Liam Liam was in a very excitable mood. I like Liam a lot because he provokes people, which I find funny, but also he is quite a genuine guy. I mean, he's quite sweet. Like, he'll say stupid things sometimes, but underneath it all, he's actually like, you know, behind all the kind of like ego and like grand statements, whatever, he's actually pretty funny and sweet and like, and he's himself. But nonetheless, he can be a difficult person to have in a crowd, or difficult when lots of other people are around, because I suppose he sometimes he wants people to know he's there. So he was drinking espresso. The first thing I remember was I went into this bar and he was drinking espresso martinis, and he got right up in my face, like, you know, about a centimetre away from my face, and he said, he was pointing at it, these espresso martinis are better than crack. And he was really sort of like adamant that I have one. I don't drink very often. So anyway, that was a sort of like, it was an indication that the evening, he was intent on making the evening a memorable one. So we went to Alexandra.
Were you meeting him there, or did you just bump into him?
We met him at a bar beforehand.
Oh, sorry, right, okay.
And then from there we went to Alexandra Palace. So okay, we had a few espresso martinis, and then we went on to Alexandra Palace, and we walked in, and we were watching. So Jack White was about to start, and we watched Liam sort of like, the support band were on, and Liam disappeared. Liam Paul Gallagher disappeared, and we couldn't find them. And whatever, we thought, okay, that's weird. That, you know, he was here 1 minute, he's gone. Maybe something happened. Maybe he just got bored. Whatever. So we watched the whole gig, and it was good. You know, Jack White's always good. Like, whether you like his music or not, he's got his own thing going, and it's cool. And we went to the after party, and I saw Liam out of the corner of my eye on the other side of a window. And he was outside, and he was gesturing for me to sort of like unlock this fire door to let him in. And it turned out the reason he disappeared was the second we'd got in there and we were watching the support band, he decided that he wanted to go meet Jack White, and he wanted to go into the backstage area, you know, like before the show, and just sort of like get in everyone's face. And what had happened was he walked straight into Jack White's dressing room, and the first thing he said to him was, "You look like one of those Amish in that hat." Jack White was in a period of wearing those big hats, and he made his whole touring crew wear them and everything. So Liam goes straight in there and goes, "You look like one of the Amish," and within 5 seconds, Jack White had his entire security team escort Liam and his brother off the premises, and they were not to be allowed back in for the whole thing. So Liam was trying to get me to sneak him back in because he'd been kicked out after about 5 seconds.
Did you get him back in?
No. I mean, to be honest, there were so many funny things about that evening, but just the fact that he lasted 5 seconds at the show, I thought was really funny. It was like, I mean, Leighton Baines couldn't believe his eyes, because he was like, he's really into music, Leighton. So it's like, you know, it's obviously, being a Premiership footballer, it's weirder because, like, you know, you must meet famous people all the time and you go to those kind of things, but he's not, you know, to him it was like, wow, there's one of Oasis here, you know, like, I mean, it was just such a different world for him seeing, and then you know, and seeing the way Liam was behaving, it was like every sort of like cliche about being in a band was true, and he was witnessing it firsthand.
What year was that?
What year was that? Well, it wasn't that long ago. I'd probably like, I don't know when Jack White was doing his solo stuff, probably like 2014 or something.
Oh, okay.
Something like that.
And have you seen Liam since or anything to talk about it?
I don't know if he would remember.
Yeah.
He has such a, I don't know. He's like a kid, you know, in a nice way. and I do like him. Whether I would be able to take him home to meet my family, I'm not sure.
Yes. Did you see him again that night then, or was it just that was the end of it?
Well, peeping through the window, that was the last, last I saw of him. He was just through the fire door, and then at some point, I think Paul at some point climbed through the window of a toilet or something, and there was, I don't know, little things, but that's
funny. It's funny that Jack White just wasn't going to entertain it in any way as well.
No, literally, he wouldn't even. It didn't matter. Oasis did just get out.